Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel for bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'm going to show you commentaries that have been released in about the last 12 months. Some were released maybe a little bit before that, but I tried to pick the last 12 months or since about the last time I made my last video. So speaking of that, it's been a little while, but I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad you're back too. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through some of these new releases. Because they're so new, I haven't spent a lot of time with many of them, just a few of them. So this isn't so much a review video as just to show you kind of what's out there and what's new. At the end of the video, I'm also going to show you a new commentary series that I recently got, and just kind of show you what that looks like and what the audience is and who the authors are. So you can look forward to that. But first, I will start with, this one might be the most notable one of the new releases because it's a replacement volume for the well-reviewed Peter O'Brien volume in this series, one of the most popular commentary series, the Pillar New Testament Commentary series, still edited by D.A. Carson. And the Peter O'Brien commentary was pulled from publication maybe, I can't remember now, 7 or 8 years ago because of accusations of plagiarism. So I got this replacement volume maybe 3 weeks ago. Sometimes I get commentaries. Publishing companies will send me volumes before they're actually available to the public, but it's usually only by a month or two. So if this isn't available yet, there's probably a release date, and it's probably available. It'll probably be available very soon. So a couple of things. So I have not spent a lot of time with it, but a couple of things stood out to me. One is the author, Constantine Campbell. If you're familiar with the world of biblical studies, especially kind of the subcategory of Paul and Pauline literature, then you might be familiar with the name Constantine Campbell. I have one of his books on my shelf at the moment. It's called Paul. Let me see if his bio has it. Yeah, just to get the title right. Paul and Union with Christ. Very well-reviewed book on Paul, and that's in my library. So that's kind of how I was familiar with the name, but you might be familiar with it. So you might be familiar with it too. Another thing I noticed is it's not nearly as long as Peter O'Brien's volume, which not necessarily negative, but just something I noticed. This one's about a little over 300 pages. So a lot of people have been waiting on the replacement volumes for Peter O'Brien's commentaries, and now the first one is out. I believe this replacement volume in the Word series, on the volume Peter O'Brien wrote in that series, is coming out soon as well. So, for your consideration. Next up is Matthew by Charles Quarles in the Evangelical Biblical Theology Commentary series. I am familiar with Charles Quarles because he wrote the Matthew volume in the Exegetical Guide to the Greek New Testament series. He is research professor of New Testament and Biblical Theology at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. So this volume is almost 800 pages, a little over 800 pages, and Lexham Press continues to publish this EBTC series, and volumes have been very well received. So I would expect this to be the same. Evangelical Biblical Theology Commentary series, Matthew by Charles Quarles. Another volume that's out for pastors is a new volume in the Keru Commentary series on Jeremiah and Lamentation. Subtitle of the series is A Commentary for Biblical Preaching and Teaching. And as is true with, I think, all the volumes in this series, there are two authors. One writes on the exegesis, and then the other writes on homiletical helps. So preaching tips, application suggestions, that kind of thing. So the exegetical portion of this commentary is written by Dwayne Garrett, and the homiletical portion by Calvin Pearson. Dwayne Garrett is at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and Calvin Pearson is retired from Crossroads Baptist outside of Houston, and it sounds like he's now writing in his retirement. So this has been a well-reviewed series especially for preachers. So it's Jeremiah and Lamentations. Next up is the Joshua volume and the Baker Commentary on the Old Testament series. Probably many of you know that what was available for many years was just the wisdom literature in this particular series. And now John Goldengay is writing. I don't know how John Goldengay has so much. He writes, like, if I wrote 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I don't think I could produce what John Goldengay, well, that goes without saying. Anyway, so John Goldengay, if you follow the world of Bible commentaries, the name will sound familiar. Maybe his most well-reviewed commentary is Daniel in the Word Biblical Commentary series, or at least his most well-known. But he's been writing a lot in this Baker Commentary series. So he is still at Fuller, I believe. Yeah, professor of Old Testament at Fuller Theological Seminary. So he's written a lot of commentaries. Excuse me. All right, next up, Erdman's continues to come out with replacement volumes in the NICOT commentary series. The interesting thing about that is the NICOT series has many well-reviewed commentaries. Some of the best reviewed commentaries on Old Testament books are from this series, including the book of Ruth. But now, Peter H.W. Lau has written the replacement volume for the book of Ruth, and I was not familiar with Peter Lau, but his bio says that he's a visiting scholar in Old Testament studies at, I cannot pronounce that, I'm sorry, it's at a seminary in Malaysia. And he has written academic and pastoral books on Ruth, Ezekiel, Psalms, Esther. So I'm interested to spend more time on this. Ruth is also one of my favorite books. I feel like I say that too much. The Reformation Commentary on Scripture series continues to come out with new volumes. Some of you might be familiar with the Ancient Christian Commentary series. That's the same design, but it's black. That one's completed, and so now the series is continuing for this RCS series. And so Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon are now out. In the Kriegel Exegetical Library series, you have a new volume by Michael B. Shepard on a commentary on Jeremiah. Thick volume, over 900 pages long. I am familiar with Michael Shepard because he wrote the volume on the minor prophets in this series. I believe it was called the Book of the 12, but it's essentially a commentary on the minor prophets. The Book of the 12. And he is a professor of biblical studies at Cedarville University in Cedarville, Ohio. So for your consideration, I could not remember when this came out. If it did, maybe I've shown this before. I can't remember, but it's probably 12 to 24 months old. I don't know. All right. But this is the Matthew volume by R. Allen Culpepper in the New Testament Library Commentary series. So by John Knox Press, Westminster John Knox Press. There's two commentary series from this publisher that are well reviewed: the New Testament Library and also the companion Old Testament Library. And then there's also the Interpretation series. So the Interpretation series is for preaching and teaching, and the New Testament Library series is a little bit more mid-level than that. So it is for can be used by pastors and professors, but there's a little bit more depth to the exegesis than the Interpretation series. So that's how I would think about it. Did I say how many pages were in this? Over 600 pages in this particular volume. And Alan Culpepper is Dean Emeritus of the McAfee School of Theology at Mercer University in Atlanta, Georgia. He was formerly at Baylor. All right, next up is a volume called Mark's Gospel. I think this is standalone. I can't tell anything about it that suggests that it's the first part of a series. The title is Mark's Gospel, History, Theology, Interpretation by C. Clifton Black. I know that name. I can't think of why I know that name, but I do know that name. Clifton Black, meaning I can't think of what else he has written. But he is a professor of biblical theology at Princeton Theological Seminary and an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. So this volume is over 500 pages long, and just flipping through it, it looks to be mid-level. So my guess would be that the target audience is pastors. Next up in the Keru series is the volume on Acts. The two authors are John Harvey and David Gentino, I think is how you say it. John Harvey wrote the Romans volume in, actually this series, the Kriegel series. Can you see that? Yeah. In the Kriegel series, so that's one way that I'm familiar with John Harvey. He does the exegesis, and David Gentino is writes the homiletical part. So Acts is now out in the Keru series. Helpful layout. Helpful layouts are always good. Next up in the Story of God Bible Commentary series is the volume on Exodus by Christopher J.H. Wright. He has written well-reviewed commentaries. I'm trying to remember one off the top of my head. He has one in the Apollos Old Testament commentary series that's well-reviewed. Can't remember what volume it's on or what book it's on. But he is International Ministries Director of the Langham Partnership International. Maybe it's because Exodus is one of my favorite books of the Bible, but I have spent some time with this volume and I really like it. Wright makes some application suggestions that I really like that I had not considered before from some key passages in Exodus. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I have spent time with this volume and I really like it. Next up in the ZECOT series, Zondervan Exegetical Commentary in the Old Testament series is the Book of Judges by Mark Boda and Mary Conway, and they're both at, is it McMaster? Yes, McMaster Divinity School. Mark Boda, if you follow the world of Bible commentaries, he's written volumes in the NIV Application Commentary series and the NICOT series as well. That was his last release, I believe, was Zechariah in the NICOT series. One characteristic about that particular volume on Zechariah was that it is very technical. That was what the reviews said. Even if you look at, not even just academic reviews, just look at the reviews on Amazon, people will talk about how technical it was, even to the point where pastors were saying that it wasn't as helpful to them. So I have not spent a lot of time with this, but that would be my question going into it, is how technical is this? Is this more like Mark Boda wrote in the NIV Application Commentary series, or more like he wrote Zechariah in the NICOT series? So this series is designed for pastors, so that might be a hint, but I just haven't spent a lot of time with it yet, so we will see. Next up in the NICOT series is another replacement volume by Bill T. Arnold, who is at Asbury, and it's Deuteronomy chapters 1 through 11. So that's all that's out so far. So I imagine, well, let's see, Deuteronomy chapter 1, so it could be 2 or maybe even 3 more volumes before this is complete. We'll see. One of the things I have always appreciated about Bill Arnold is the clarity of his writing, and so I'm hoping that that's the case with this volume too, because he's covering 11 chapters of Deuteronomy in over 600 pages on 11 chapters of Deuteronomy. I'm not sure how much of that is the introduction, but that's obviously he goes into a lot of depth, covering that many passages, chapters of the Bible in over 600 pages. So I'm hopeful that the clarity of his writing is as good as it's always been, and I that would be my expectation. So yeah, so the NICOT continues to come out with the replacement volumes. Last volume before I get to this new series that I'm going to show you is the ZECOT series on Ezra and Nehemiah by Gary V. Smith. Gary V. Smith, he wrote a commentary in the Mentor series. I can't remember the name. I can't remember which book off the top of my head, but he's also written he has a volume in the NIV Application Commentary series on the 3 of the minor prophets, if I remember correctly. I can't remember which minor prophets, but he is a retired professor of Christian studies at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee. So I'm really happy to see more volumes, the Mark Boda volume and this Gary Smith volume in this. This is one of my favorite series now. So very helpful. And I look forward to, I think it's Leviticus is due out next later this year. All right, let's look at this newer series. Hendrickson Publishing sent me this series, so thank you to them, or sent me these volumes, so thank you to them. And this is this one's called The Preacher's Hebrew Companion to Genesis 1 through 11. And this is the Preacher's Greek Companion to Philippians. So the Genesis volume is written by Brian Doak, who is a professor at George Fox University in Oregon. And the Philippians volume was written by, let's see, Sean McDonough from Gordon Conwell. So interesting title, Preacher's Greek Companion. So I would expect from the title that there's going to be some exegetical help, a lot of Greek insight because it's a Greek companion. And then, but it's a Preacher's Greek Companion. So I would expect Greek and preaching help or application suggestions or things along those lines. So it looks like we have a lot of Greek diagramming. Looks like we have parsing, and we have transliteration, and we have interpretation. And then we have, so here's a section called From Text to Sermon. So this must be where the preaching help is. We have the big idea, the bridge to theology, and illustrations. So illustrations is obviously written with teachers and preachers in mind. So it's a combination of insight from the Greek and preaching help. Reminds me a little bit of the exegetical, what was it called? Exegetical Greek Guide to the New Testament, I think is what it's called. That series, if you're familiar with that series. So I imagine this volume is the same, but just with Hebrew. Yep, so we have interpretation, we have translation, transliteration, parsing details, and paragraphs of interpretation help. And then again, yeah, from text to sermon. So we have historical and literary context, bridge to the gospel, and relevance for today. So that section is a little bit reminiscent of the NIV application commentary series, and bridge to the gospel, that seems particularly helpful. And I wonder if that's true of all the Old Testament volumes that they have that bridge to the gospel portion. So for your consideration, the Preacher's Hebrew Companion and the Preacher's Greek Companion. All right, everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.